They just wanted a peaceful holiday drive. But what they found was a nightmare that wouldn't let them leave. A sinister motel, eerie masked men, and dark secrets lurking in every corner. This isn't your average roadside stop. The movie starts a few years ago with a married couple, David and Amy, driving home for the holidays. They're in the middle of nowhere when they almost hit a raccoon, which scares them so much they nearly go off the road. Luckily, the raccoon didn't make a fuss, so they kept going. Soon after, the car engine starts making loud noises. David tells Amy it might be okay to keep driving and see if it gets better. Amy, tired and frustrated, agrees. They drive for another 10 minutes before the noises get even louder. They have to pull over to check it out. They stop at an old, run-down gas station that looks like it's been abandoned for years. It's the kind of place you see in scary movies. A man suddenly appears by their window. The couple is startled, but he just wants to help. He's a mechanic who also works with fireworks. He checks the engine and finds nothing wrong, saying it's safe to drive but will make a lot of noise. During the check, the mechanic gives Amy a sparkler. She thanks him, and David is surprised she's excited about something she'll probably never use. I, for one, love sparklers. They drive off, and after a while, David jokes about Amy enjoying her sparkler. Amy throws it out of the window. They argue for a while about how it was silly to throw away something they could have sold or used for art projects. A few minutes of bickering later, the car stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. Now what? It's getting dark, and this is literally as far from civilization as you can get. They could either do an impromptu camping session or walk back to the gas station. David decided to go ahead and walk back, with Amy following shortly after. Upon arriving at the gas station, they saw it was closed but spotted a motel next door. So they walked over. As they entered the establishment, they heard harrowing screams coming from behind the counter. "What was that?" Amy whispered nervously to David. He rang the bell, and out emerged a creepy man rocking a suspicious mustache, who seemed delighted by their presence. The couple stared awkwardly at him until he realized that his TV set was making them uncomfortable, so he turned it off. "Can you call a mechanic?" David asked. "Our car broke down on the highway." The motel owner, Frank, knew he didn't have any mechanics on hand, but he offered to point them in the right direction. "Sure, there's a place 30 miles back that might still be open this late. You can use the payphone there." The payphone needed quarters, so David got some change, and that's when things started getting weird. The man started counting out change excruciatingly slowly. The couple grew more and more impatient by the second. But finally, David got all his quarters and headed for the door. "Oh, actually, now that I think about it, they're probably closed," the man said. "Weird," he then added giddily. "And I'm the only one open." Intrigued but a little on edge about the idea of staying at a motel, David and Amy ultimately gave in. It was only $5 extra for the honeymoon suite, which apparently had some perks the others didn't. Amy insisted on a regular room, but Frank kept pushing the honeymoon suite. He smiled and handed them the keys at no extra cost. As David and Amy departed for the room, Frank watched with a sinister gaze. David and Amy entered their motel room. It was filthy, but some critters called it home. Amy insisted she'd be sleeping in her clothes tonight, and David added that he'd even be keeping his shoes on. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock at the door. They froze and looked at each other. David went to take a closer look but found no one outside. Then there was another knock, this one louder and more insistent. Amy raised her eyebrows at David. That one sounded like it came from the side door. David walked slowly to the door and yelled out, "Who is it?" There was no response. He looked to Amy, her eyes wide with fear. There was another knock at the front door, followed by an equally jarring one at the side door. David pounded loudly on it 3 times before yelling again, "What do you want?" There was no response. Amy implored him not to anger the ghosts or whoever was doing this. Fine. Instead, David paid a visit to Frank. Oddly enough, Frank assured David that there were no other guests staying at the motel that night. David wasn't convinced and asked Frank to look into the matter. Frank agreed to do so but believed it was probably just a drunk guy making noise. However, David insisted that Frank be armed just in case. After David left, Frank grabbed a gun from above the counter and had a sinister look on his face. Back in the motel room, David began to unwind. The incessant knocking from the neighbors had stopped for now, but Amy was still nervous. She wanted to go back to the car for the night, but David just wanted to sleep. He decided to wind down with some TV. Unfortunately, static wasn't his cup of tea. No matter, he found some VHS tapes lying around. Remember those? Unsure of what to expect, he popped one into the VCR and settled in for some entertainment. However, as he watched, a creeping feeling of terror crawled up his spine. The tapes were not your typical horror movies. They were poorly shot, raw, and unfiltered. They seemed almost real. Wait a second, the room this is shot in looks awfully familiar. It quickly dawned on David and Amy that they were in fact witnessing a snuff film recorded in the very room they were staying in. Their suspicions were confirmed when David spotted a not-so-very carefully hidden camera. Now he's no stranger to recording in the bedroom, but this was one step too far. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered before going out. The couple was startled. The incessant knocking from earlier started up again. Amy squeezed his hand, he squeezed back. The power went off and on again as they caught a glimpse of a masked man in the bathroom. Amy was shook. The power returned and stayed on this time, but the masked man was gone. Amy wanted to leave immediately, but David suggested they stay where they were. He suspected that the bad guys were outside waiting for them to exit their room, so they needed to find another way out, perhaps the bathroom. Oh great, the window was nailed shut. Then David spotted an apple on the sink. It was half-eaten and it was Amy's favorite kind. Did you bring this? In fact, she didn't. Amy insisted she left it in the car. At this point, the couple was utterly terrified. They'd been trapped in the room for what felt like hours, but they knew it had only been minutes. They had to come up with a plan to escape quickly. David decided that the darkness of night could provide cover if they ran out now. After some hasty debate, the couple agreed to make a break for it and head into the night. However, they only made it a few yards before running into a masked man wielding a knife. They turned in another direction, but yet again, a terrifying figure greeted them. They fled back toward the room in a panic, but the door wouldn't open. They struggled to get inside as the masked figures closed in. At the last moment, the couple narrowly avoided certain death. Inside, Amy inspected the bathroom window once more, only to find another man peering in. They had nowhere left to go. They didn't know what to do next until David realized he had an idea. He would run outside to the payphone, leaving his wife Amy by the window to distract the goons. David made a run for it, successfully reaching the booth. He fumbled for the payphone, his fingers trembling with adrenaline. As he dialed 911, it rang once, twice, 3 times before someone picked up. A deep, rough voice answered, "Police department. I'm trapped in a motel. They have knives, help us." There's silence on the other end. David thinks he can hear breathing. A whisper comes through the phone. "Panicking won't help your odds, Frank. Is that you? This is like a reverse prank call." Anyway, David hangs up the payphone and a truck suddenly speeds out from behind and slams into the booth. He barely manages to jump out of the way in time. Dazed, he makes his way back to the motel and bursts into his room, where Amy is waiting for him. "I thought you were dead," she says breathlessly, throwing her arms around him. "We're not yet," David says grimly before heading to the bathroom. He smashes the mirror and uses one of the shards to arm himself with a makeshift weapon. For a second there, I thought he just hated his reflection, which would have been relatable. The two sit on the floor together and wait. David's hand is clenched around the glass shank while Frank watches them on his security camera feed. Hours pass without incident until Amy falls asleep. When she wakes up again, she sees that David has been reviewing footage of past victims on the TV, all of whom were blindsided by the sudden appearance of a man inside the room. He seems to enter from the bathroom, but how? It's almost like he's already in there. David has a look and finds a hidden trap door, but before he can investigate further, a truck pulls into the establishment. The couple watches from the window and sees a man get out of the driver's seat. He heads towards the motel entrance. The couple shouts and bangs on the window to get his attention, but he doesn't seem to hear them. They continue their efforts until he spots them. "Bingo," he says, beginning to walk closer with a perplexed look on his face. Suddenly, masked men appear behind him. They get closer and closer, but he does not hear them as they prepare to claim another victim. Frank appears and greets the man by name. "Bill, been waiting for you. The good stuff's right here." The man is delighted at the news and snatches up the box of tapes eagerly. He casually makes his way back to his truck, but not before flashing one final knowing gaze at the petrified couple. Left with no other option, the couple turns their attention back to the hidden door. David goes first, then Amy follows. The tunnel they find themselves in is cramped and dark. Amy starts to panic, she can't see anything. Then she feels something brush her leg. "It's rats," she screams at David to help her, but given their circumstances, this is the least of their worries. It's not long before they're past the rats and at the end of the tunnel. They discover a ladder that leads up into an office. David climbs up first and then helps Amy out of the tunnel. They ogle the assortment of TVs broadcasting views of all the rooms. David checks the door to make sure it's safe for them to leave. He takes one peek and realizes they're at the front desk. "We're no better off than we started," Amy says, defeated, but quickly spots a glimmer of hope, a phone. She dials 911, but before she can even give a sliver of information about their location or who's after them, Frank and his goons arrive. "Where are they?" Frank barks, upset that they've lost track of their targets. He enters the office where the couple was just moments before. He notices that they used the phone, rips out the phone line in anger, and shouts a command to his goons. They're underground. They sprint off after their prey. Darkness closes in around the couple. They can hear the sound of their pursuers close behind them, crawling with frenetic fervor, moving at high speeds. They look like wild animals in their natural habitat. Meanwhile, the couple crawls as fast as they can, knowing that every corner they turn could be their last. The sounds get closer and closer, each one reverberating throughout the tunnel. David and Amy are exhausted but keep going faster and faster. Suddenly, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, a ladder. Amy looks back as David climbs it. The darkness greets her. It appears the tunnel dwellers have lost track of them. David reaches down and helps her up. She emerges into the dim light of another room. David barricades the door to the tunnel with a heavy desk while Amy catches her breath against the wall. They sit and reflect on the chaos they've faced so far. Strangely, this situation has brought them closer than they've been in years. I guess that's just one way to rekindle a marriage. Suddenly, a police car arrives at the motel. They must have traced Amy's call. Amy and David look out of the window and see the car pull up. Though they're hesitant to make a move, they watch as Frank greets the police officer. The officer seems suspicious of Frank right away, asking several questions about his business and how long he's been in operation. Frank answers with a smile, trying not to seem nervous. He offers to show him around the place. The officer agrees. They walk towards a room, and Frank goes to open a door but stops short, claiming he has the wrong set of keys. "I'm so sorry, officer," Frank stammers awkwardly. "Let me go grab those keys." The cop stares at him coldly as he leaves. Before having a go at the door, it opens. He enters the dark motel room, his flashlight scanning wildly. He hears a noise and turns toward it. The lights flick on, and he's looking at a TV playing a snuff film. Meanwhile, David and Amy are struggling to keep the masked men from getting through the trapdoor. The men are very strong. Amy takes a moment to check on the police officer. She sees him stumble out of the room, panicked with his gun in hand. As David is about to be overpowered, the couple decides to run. The officer sees them and stops with his gun pointed at them. They look scared and messy, but the officer realizes they are the victims, not the ones he's looking for. He lets them into his car and even lets them ride in the front seat. But when he turns the key, the engine doesn't start. It's been sabotaged. I saw that coming. As the officer checks the engine, a mistake, a masked man appears behind him and attacks him with a knife. The couple runs out of the car and into another motel room. Frank watches them escape, regretting that he didn't deal with them earlier. David smashes a window, tears a piece of Amy's shirt, and hangs it outside. He tells her to hide in the attic to confuse their attackers. David plans to go to the front desk to get a gun. As soon as he steps outside, he is stabbed. Amy tries to stay quiet from above, but her cries go unheard. The night is long and frightening. When Amy wakes up, she thinks it might have all been a dream. But she sees her husband's feet below. He's dead. As Amy climbs out, a masked man appears behind her. He waits patiently, which is both impressive and scary. Amy runs and manages to hijack a car, running over her attackers. "God damn," Frank says when he arrives. He's filled with despair. Amy is already gone, so she goes back to the front desk to call the cops again. The phone line is gone, so she grabs a hammer. Just as she reaches for a gun, Frank appears and knocks it away. They fight until Amy is knocked down next to the gun. She grabs it and shoots Frank twice before he can attack her. She checks on her husband and finds he's still alive but barely breathing. Amy takes the phone line from Frank's body and calls for help. The story ends with Amy holding David as they wait for help. The nightmare might be over for now, but some scars never heal. Do you think they'll ever feel safe again? Comment your thoughts and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more movie recaps.